Jennifer Stanton worked for a bordello run by a vampire madame named Bianca, who I'm told is a redcourt vampire, a detail that must be meaningful to a person that is not me. Harry goes to question her. She is kind of your stereotypical busty, sexy woman, and she gets a kick out of Harry's adherence to chivalrous protocol, and they flirt for a bit before the questioning gets serious. She thinks that Harry is responsible for the murder and tries to take revenge, shifting out of her womanly shape and becoming a hideous bat-like rotten corpse, defined by a look of hunger. Points for originality. Bianca's security guard confiscated most of his weapons, but left his pentacle necklace because he doubted its power. Fortunately, in the Dresden Files universe, it's faith itself that works against vampires, not faith in Jesus. The pentacle symbolizes magic itself in this context, so Harry is protected by his faith in magic. Good on Jim Butcher for adding that tidbit. There's always an element of religious intolerance in works that insist that it must be the Christian cross and/or faith in Jesus. I don't care if Joss Whedon's a secular humanist. He made vampires repelled by crosses only. Harry convinces her that he doesn't know anything, so they back off from their standoff. She transforms back into the womanly form again, but Harry now knows that she looks grotesque and can't go back to their flirtation games. It illustrates how femininity is a very fragile social performance, one that can be undone by associating a woman with something considered unfeminine, similar to the function of transphobic "she's really a man" humor. If you look at it rationally, it's no different than someone putting on a lot of makeup, and shouldn't have anything to do with whether or not she is evil, but ugliness, and especially ugliness that creates a departure from the performance of femininity, is a convenient shorthand for bigots. Not that I'm specifically targeting Stormfront for this, as it is a general problem throughout the human race, but the fear of difference without reason is an aspect of horror that I find disturbing, and taps into all of our inner bigotry. Bianca gives him a lead, suggesting that he get in contact with an old employee of hers, Linda Randall, who now works independently. Harry turns to go, and then she, presumably as a display of power, calls one of her employees in, a female sex worker, who Bianca then feeds on. The display gives Harry the heebie-jeebies, partially because the vampire's bite is orgasmic, and he now knows what Bianca really looks like. Again, it's bigoted. I don't have anything against the sexuality of the scene, though, and sex appeal is an expected part of the vampire trope, and it's not executed in a way that I would find particularly condescending. A lot of female vampires are sexy, far more than male vampires, and there is sometimes an association with sex work. I know the Three Sisters and Dracula are commonly thought to represent sex workers as a means of demonizing immigrants, breaking down contemporary English sexual mores. Later on, there is stuff like vampire hookers and Bordello of Blood, essentially sexploitation movies. It's easy to associate these demons in the shadows with taboo demographics, and that combined with the sex appeal of the characters makes vampire sex workers an attractive subject. I think having the vampire be the Madame specifically is to communicate her power. With effort, Harry gets in touch with Linda Randall. She is very overtly sexual and uses this to try to put him off guard. Having seen well-written characters that like sex and have overt sex appeal, I don't think there's anything wrong with that in and of itself. I don't think Linda is very well written, but I'm not sure it's problematic in a feminist way either. Harry interrogates her, and she overtly lies to deflect his questions, but she does take one of his business cards. He works a bit on the Victor Sills case, with curiouser and curiouser results, and then works on figuring out how the murderer could have accomplished the heart-ripping out magic. He comes up with a basic outline of the magic involved, and he determines that it involves magic so powerful and focused that it only could have been accomplished by a real master or a group. And then he goes to the police station to report his findings to Murphy. While there, he helps out some officers trying to restrain a junkie, who at first seems like he's just hallucinating and babbling nonsense, until he looks at Harry and is like,
"You're a wizard, Harry."
And Harry's like,
"I'm a what?"
It seems there's a product on the streets called 3i that doesn't make people high so much as it forces their consciousnesses to perceive magic. Harry reasons that there's a gang war going on between Johnny Marcone, who sells conventional narcotics, and whose bodyguard was Tommy Tom, and a group of wizards selling 3i, and that this group carried out the homicide to get back at Marcone. He tells Murphy his theory and then collapses from exhaustion, so she takes him home. Linda Randall then calls him. She has important information that she wants to relay to him, and they decide on a time and place they could meet. If you think that this sounds like a setup for her untimely death, good job, you know your cliches. This makes her fall into the problematic trope of the dead sex worker. Sex workers are typically used only to accent works of fiction and do not have an active role in the story. Their deaths are dehumanizing and are related to moralistic narratives, where it is deemed a karmic retribution for their perceived sins. Aside from this aspect, I'm not in the best position to analyze the portrayal of sex work in the book, not being a sex worker myself, so I'm honestly struggling to comment on it. I do think that the job role depicted is all exaggerated for sex appeal and to be a typical noir trope. I have some thoughts on how things depicted could be good or bad, but it all comes down to my admitting ignorance of the subject matter. If there are any sex workers who have read this who are watching this video, I would be interested in what you think of the depiction. Harry calls Monica to report his findings, only for her to mysteriously dismiss him from her case, while pretending that she's talking to someone else. He finds it strange, but lets it go. There's then a thunderstorm, and Harry can feel its energy. There was another storm on the night of the murder, and Harry realizes that the killer probably drew energy from the storm itself. This is why the book is called Stormfront. But I find the title a little awkward due to it sharing a name with the white supremacist internet forum. You know what would be a better name? Heart Attack. That would work well with the punny trend a bunch of these novels have. Susan arrives for their date, catching Harry off guard. He smells awful, so he jumps in the shower, and that's when a toad demon attacks. Harry's getting too close to the case, so the killer conjured a toad demon to take him out. Harry has to fight the toad demon while naked, with shampoo in his hair, and it's kind of a goofy impediment comparable to Die Hard's premise of John McClane fighting terrorists with no shoes on. He tells Susan to take the escape potion, but she accidentally takes the love potion instead.
I held my nose, I closed my eyes, I took a drink.
Ah, my little darling, it is love at first sight, is it not? No?
And then he has to deal with her while running away from a toad demon through the streets of Chicago, naked, during a thunderstorm. The love potion payoff essentially turns her into Pepe Le Pew, but he's not the weak, vulnerable cat with the white paint stripe. He's still John McClane with his shoes off. So it doesn't have the same power dynamic of Pepe Le Pew cartoons. She is willing to rape him, but she doesn't have the power to do so. So she functions as a goofy impediment with sex appeal. While not explicitly labeling what she's attempting to do as rape, the book does acknowledge that Harry's physical arousal does not equal consent on his part. And there is an overt violating element to the character's advances, similar to that of the three sisters in Dracula. That does make it better than a lot of depictions, like, say, Wedding Crashers. In general, though, it doesn't take the violating aspect of the love potion itself seriously enough. Harry cures Susan and ends up using the thunderstorm energy to beat the toad demon. This attracts Morgan's attention, and he shows up accusing Harry of summoning the demon. He says he's going to bring the council down on him, and in 2 days, they're gonna kill him. So now Harry has a tight time frame. And that's when a cop shows up to arrest Harry and Susan because they look like crazy people. Fortunately, he works for Murphy, and her desire to summon Harry supersedes all this silliness. So the cop takes him to the crime scene of Linda Randall, because the cliches must be fulfilled. Susan is just fine because why wouldn't she be? It's not like that's a horribly traumatizing event or anything. The noir must go on, and she takes off with a smile. Harry goes to talk to Murphy. He pretends he didn't know the victim, but she found the business card and knows that he's lying. She demands that he share what he knows, and he's an idiot who wants to stoically bear the burden himself, which just so happens to make him look extremely suspicious. So now the police are actively investigating him, and he's lost them as a resource. And it just gets worse from there. A goon working for Johnny Marcone jumps him and tears out some of his hair before making a break for it. Harry makes the connection to what is essentially a poppet.
Hello, Poppet.
Also known by the racist misnomer voodoo doll, associating legends associated with the English witch with the religion of African slaves as part of their demonization. That could be used to carry out the heart-ripping out spell. I have to give the book some credit for not explicitly saying voodoo doll, though the author may not have realized its racist origins. Harry grabs his staff and does a spell to heighten his sense of smell, so he can sniff out the goon's aura like Toucan Sam follows his nose to Fruit Loops.
Follow your nose!
He barges into Johnny Marcone's club to demand his hair be returned. Turns out that the goon was actually a turncoat working for Marcone's rival, and already turned the hair over to them. Harry and Marcone have the same enemy, but Marcone has his reputation to worry about, and can't help Harry after Harry visibly threatened him. So Harry's on his own. Harry returns to Linda Randall's apartment, where he encounters a burglar who is connected to the Victor Sells case. Turns out Linda Randall participated in his orgy, and this guy obtained photo evidence that he hopes to use to blackmail someone. Harry destroys the photos and goes to question Monica. It's a fairly common noir trope for the person who hires the PI in the beginning to end up trying to screw them over somehow. And the book has been hinting that this could be the case with Monica. First, Harry speculates that only a woman could be as creatively sadistic with the murders. And then Monica takes him off the case shortly before the toad demon arrives. At some point in the story, Harry starts referring to the killer as a man, but there is no evidence for this. So most readers are probably suspecting Monica is the killer. Harry himself thinks that Monica and Victor are at it as a team. When he gets to the cell's place, however, he does a trick where he gazes into Monica's soul and determines that she is a total victim. Her husband is a classic abuser, a psychopath obsessed with power who turned to magic to get his fix. He determined that he could produce stronger magic by harnessing others' emotions, such as lust, and was hosting orgies and implied to be raping Monica's sister, Jennifer Stanton. He is distributing 3-Eye and has a conflict with Marcone, and Jennifer thought that she could gain an edge over him by going to Marcone, thus prompting the murder. Monica was hoping that she could protect her family by getting a wizard to encounter and confront Victor, which is why she hired Harry. The fact that the villain of the book is a perpetuator of domestic abuse, and that we see this through the statements of his wife, does make it somewhat of a feminist narrative. It thoroughly portrays a feminist bad guy as monstrous, and it thereby has some feminist appeal. On the other hand, Monica is a big stereotype and kind of overly weak. I'm fine with her not being the villain, but it's a twist that takes away her implied active agency in the plot, and makes it all about Harry as the male hero. It makes the character feel tame, and I feel like the narrative taking away her hinted status as villain is less of a twist and more like straightening out the kinks to make the plot less interesting. Harry promises that he'll take down Victor, and he heads home to make use of an artifact that Victor had, a scorpion talisman. Unfortunately, Murphy decides to ransack his place and accidentally activates the scorpion, which is kind of a golem rigged to grow to gigantic proportions and attack people. Harry has to rescue Murphy in an admittedly thrilling sequence, but still one where the female character you might expect to actually be able to hold her own is poisoned and thus down for the count, and Harry has to be the hero. In the process, the scorpion is destroyed. And another storm rolls in. So now Victor can supercharge himself. Harry has one more encounter with Morgan, in which Harry has to physically assault Morgan to get away, meaning that soon the White Council will come down on him with a vengeance. Harry tracks down Victor to his lake house and enters for the big boss fight, just in the nick of time before Victor casts the heart-ripping-out spell on Harry. There is then a big fun action sequence. Victor summons the Toad Demon, but Harry frees it and it attacks Victor before the two of them are killed by scorpion golems. And the flame from his and Harry's fire spells burns the place to the ground, thus eliminating the further threat of Victor's evil. There is then a very fast wrap-up. Morgan shows up and recognizes what happened. He almost apologizes, but more or less says, "Just because you weren't behind this crime doesn't mean you won't do something in the future. I know your character. I've got my eye on you." Nevertheless, his superiors in the White Council deem Harry's actions worthy of taking him off the restrictions put on him for his mysterious past crimes. The police blame 3-Eye on Victor's surviving minions. Harry is no longer a suspect. It's implied Harry starts a rumor about an alliance with Marcone to keep criminals off his back. He has a successful date with Susan and brags about not needing a love potion to seduce her, which is really equivalent to saying he doesn't need to hold someone at gunpoint to get a Christmas present. No one should use violence to get a gift, you jerk man. He also ended up paying back that fairy that he captured, which does make him a bit more ethical than a lot of fantasy heroes who do that kind of thing. I mean, Ash never returned to collect Pidgeot. And so concludes Stormfront, the first book in the Dresden Files. I didn't really like this book. It has a few nice action scenes and, yeah, that's pretty much it. Harry Dresden is rather bland and stereotypical as noir detectives go. And he's a real jerk when it comes to his treatment of female characters and rape potions. I guess I kind of like the Murphy character isolated from Harry's perspective, but she is constantly viewed from his perspective, so there's nothing independent to her in the book. As for the sex work portrayal, again, I'm not an expert, but it feels cliché and used only to excite and not to garner respect. Bianca is a decent villain, but there's really not enough of her. It's not just the Harry Dresden lens. She's just not in it enough to have much of a presence. She kind of reminds me of Carmilla. Carmilla was viewed through the gaze of the naive protagonist, who knew nothing about vampires, and she still got satisfying presence in the novella, but Bianca doesn't have that. Despite the over-the-top sexualization of the female characters, there's actually a weird undercurrent of sex negativity, where Harry looks disdainfully on Victor using orgies to build his power, and describes Victor's aura of lust as repellent. It's kind of like Cruel Intentions, which is pretty much just an excuse to get teenagers horny, capped with a tacked-on message about the importance of not sleeping around. In that case, I get the impression that they were marketing it based on sex appeal, and just threw in an ending for the teens to show their parents that it wasn't really about sex, even though it totally was. With Stormfront, it just feels confused. Also, Cruel Intentions actually indicates rape as a bad thing by associating excuses with a pair of obviously evil people, while Stormfront just has a Pepe Le Pew joke. That's right, I'm saying Cruel Intentions has a healthier portrayal of sexuality than in this book. So I'm done with the Dresden Files, right? After all that, this has to be the final nail in the coffin for me, right? Well, no. In doing research for this review, I read several statements from fans, people who say they love the series, who say that Stormfront is the weakest book in the series. One of them said that whenever he recommends the series to people, he advises them to just slog through the first 2 books, because the series doesn't get good until book 3. When I got the Stormfront graphic novel for Images, I was rather impressed by the way that it smoothed over some of the rougher qualities of the original Stormfront novel. If that's what I have to expect from later books, I'm intrigued. So I might actually check out the next 2 books in the series. Eventually. Maybe. If I think of it.